What's the most out-of-touch thing a rich person has said to you? Story 1. Me. Yeah, I love flying. I have a nice flight sim set up at home. Wish I could do it for real. Owner of the company. Yeah, the real thing is so much better. You should buy a plane. I love taking mine out on trips. Me. You sign my checks. This makes me think of one of two things. Either one, they have no idea how much things actually cost, or two, they were speaking without thinking. I've worked quite closely with a few very wealthy people. I have to confess that they just have no idea what stuff costs relative to a normal person's salary, including when they're the ones cutting the paychecks. The weirdest thing is that none of them were born into extravagant wealth. They had working/middle-class upbringings, and while they certainly came up having all their needs catered to, there's a huge difference between why don't you just buy the brand name chips and why don't you just buy an airplane? And someone who grew up thinking the former should still understand why the latter is an insane thing to say. And yet, it's one banana, Michael. What could it cost? $10? I know we can't stop ourselves from quoting this line in this context, but to me, it shows what great comic writing Arrested Development was. I feel like at some point in the not-too-distant future, one banana is going to cost $10, though. It's weird to consider a $5 shake was considered unusually expensive in Pulp Fiction. Humans get used to new normals. I also feel like the story is a bit different if it's in Alaska. Only place I've worked where multiple people had planes or were working on a pilot license. Still a very expensive hobby, but bush planes aren't necessarily only for millionaires. Similar, was talking to the former owner of my former company. All around good guy, but this one really got me. He sold the company and started a sustainable farm. Chickens, a few cows, a few goats, nothing big. Had a chef on staff, and they produced ready-made fresh meals and had a small local subscription service. Good stuff. I mentioned I wanted to be outside more, and the IT stuff was wearing me out a little. His advice, dead serious, was to buy a farm. Like, yeah, I'll just go drop $2 million on land, staff, animals, and food, all without knowing a thing about being a farmer. To be fair, I come from a privileged family, but like to think I'm not out of touch. My friend took over his father's company after getting a loan from his father to buy it. It probably has about 200 employees, sales in the area of 50 million. Many of the workers are new to the country, manual labor types. He was complaining about the wages people were asking for and said, why don't they just start their own companies then? Just go get a loan and just start one. The dude that got gifted a successful company with dad's money, he wouldn't have qualified from a bank, telling others to just go do it on your own. I tried to tell him it's not that easy for people. Maybe they're a single parent. Maybe they just weren't born wealthy. There's also nothing guaranteeing success. The amount of people who try and fail to run their own business and end up in financial ruin is not insignificant. My old boss at a former company pulled something similar. I did the estimating for residential construction projects there, and he told me I should buy a plot of land he'd sell me and have the company build it. I just looked at him incredulously and said, you know I price these houses, and you know how much you pay me, right? He couldn't fathom why I didn't have the money to build a house on an income that barely afforded an apartment. I really think that anybody like this that's in a company, in order to complete becoming a CEO for a company, should spend a month working the same job as their employees for the same amount of pay and live in the same neighborhood. I think there was a movie called The Super with Joe Pesci where he was sentenced to live in the apartment that he was a superintendent is, what they call a slumlord. Something like that, but maybe not as cruel. Only a little bit cruel. Story 2. In college, I made most of my money cleaning and tutoring for rich families. Here are the highlights. It's so much more convenient to have a sauna in your house. We ordered our wallpaper from Europe. It's the only way to go. I just bought the empty lot next to ours so we won't have neighbors. And my personal favorite, rich person's kid, gosh, I can't find any babysitting jobs. They've been taken by the 1%. Rich parent, honey, you are the 1%. The 1%. I'd feel a little hesitant about hiring outlaw bikers to watch my kid, but maybe their rates are competitive. It's a good thing that the parents are informing the kids to recognize their privilege. Also, kind of good that they're looking to get a job when they presumably don't need it. I noticed that too. These sound like good parents who haven't completely spoiled their kids despite having the ability to. Warren Buffett once said something along the lines of, "You should give your kids enough that they can do anything, but not so much that they can do nothing." Living in Finland, I can honestly say that having a sauna at home is very convenient. We have 3 million saunas for a population of about 5 million, so anytime you're buying or renting a flat, you'll probably find a sauna in there right next to the shower. I grew up in a rural town in the U.S. that gets cold winters. Our house had a sauna next to the laundry room in the basement. The previous owners installed it. The kids at school all assumed we were extremely rich, but the reality is that saunas are not all that expensive to build or run. It's just a small cedar-sided room with a vent and a heating element. Obviously, it's all relative. According to Google, a sauna can cost between $1,600 and $100,000. I think because saunas are less common in the U.S., people think of the more luxurious versions that would be more common in spas and fitness centers. Yeah, I do agree it's all relative, but having something like that, a sauna or some kind of like hot tub or something, I think that's just great to just relax in at the end of the day. Just something. Or at least I'd love to have a place to live with a tub that fit me. Something like that, and not where my feet are sticking out, please. Story 3. I worked for Medicaid. The big bugs at the state government level had a poverty exercise where they had to try to budget at poverty level and live on it for 3 days. My, that was so difficult. No kidding, pal. That whole idea ticked me off so bad. Reminds me of when Gwyneth Paltrow failed the $29 food stamp challenge. I'm no fan of the Goop Lady, but I think it's reasonable that she couldn't do it, and it's also good that she publicly failed. That amount is just not enough to live on, and nobody should have to. Showing that she couldn't do it shows people that it's very hard to do. If she'd completed the challenge, then everyone would just say, "See, they're fine with that amount." I don't necessarily disagree with you, but allow me an argument nonetheless. I think it could have the opposite effect. Of course, she can't do it. She's been rich her whole life. But poor people know what foods to buy, and they can live on it just fine. I know a lot of people see it as a point of pride that they would have been able to eat for a week on $29, not taking that line of thought to its end point, that the ability to eat for a week on such a small amount involves a huge reduction in diet quality. I can and have done it for $20 to $25 a week for a family of 3, me, spouse, and child. Thank goodness for Dollar Tree and YouTube. This has been in the last month. I lost my job and we have a special needs child. We scraped every cent we could. Sold things we didn't want to sell. Anyway, it can be done, but absolutely the quality is awful. No fresh fruit or vegetables. Working again now. Forgot how good a banana was till I couldn't have one. Your anger is justified, but good on them for doing it. I think our congressman should have to live on minimum wage for a month. I'll add, representatives should have the same health insurance as the lowest income residents in the state. Oh, I agree. I agree that it shouldn't just apply to people that employ us. It should apply to representatives and everything. Super PACs, I think, should be disqualified, and those representatives and congressmen should have the same kind of health insurance and the same kind of access to food that their constituents have. Just let them remember how we live, the people they represent. Story 4. I dated a rich guy who loved my authenticity, and he would pick me up in one of his dad's cool collector cars and take me to record stores. When I went to visit him, I showed up in my grandpa's old Ford F-150 truck. He asked me why I drove around in that thing. I shrugged and said, "Because I'm poor." And he said, "No, you're not." It was like I ruined his whole hipster aesthetic, and he realized I wasn't grunge. Yeah, I wore flannel from the thrift store because it was cheap, not because I was making a fashion statement. I read somewhere that the rise of grunge was terrible for the poor. Suddenly, all the thrift stores were gentrified. I heard that was happening right now because Gen Z is so into thrifting. I haven't noticed it a lot, but I don't thrift clothing often. Also, so many people are flipping things. I'm guilty, but did so before the YouTube secrets got going. Plus, places like Goodwill jacked their prices way up about 15 years ago because people still thought it was a deal since it was the thrift store. We shopped there growing up aware that we had the choice, not the need. Definitely gave me perspective. Wait, you mean you're actually poor? I thought you were cosplaying. Story 5. A kid in his early 20s started working at the restaurant I was at. A total trust fund baby. But his parents made him get a job or they would cut him off. Phone, car, apartment, school, credit card, everything. We were talking about plans for the summer. I mentioned I was going to take a weekend to head north and visit my mom. Someone else was going camping. Another guy was taking a long weekend to help his brother move. Holy hell. You guys have no idea what vacation means, do you? I'm taking my girlfriend to Spain for 2 weeks and then spending a few days in Italy before we come back. He got really upset when I asked him where he was going to work when he came back. Apparently, he didn't understand that taking 3 weeks vacation, not even 2 months into a job, isn't a thing, especially when part of that was during our busiest season of the year. Even better, when we all looked at him and told him we couldn't even afford a week off, let alone in Spain. He didn't last long. This is exactly why his parents had him take a job, so he could get a couple of reality checks and also appreciate what work is. Or at least, appreciate what not having to work as hard is. He didn't last long, but it was a serious reality check for him. I saw some very distinct changes in his attitude, positively, so I hope it worked. Story 6. Worked for a small company that was owned by 2 wealthy individuals. They were very kind and generous, but completely out of touch. One day I was at my desk, and my then boss came to me and said he was leaving early for the day to go water skiing because the weather was nice. It was early summer, and the weather was no nicer than it had been the rest of the week. I inquired where they were going, thinking it was somewhere near where we were, and he said he was going to his friend's house in Florida. He'd just booked his private flight, around a 3 to 3.5 hour flight. Then there was the time he left early to fly to his friend's house to go quail hunting. The other owner, also wealthy, would jet around the world on a whim to go surfing. Like everywhere. During a conversation about what we were doing for the holidays one year, he said he rented a big house in Canada and hired a helicopter so he, his family, and friends could go heli-skiing. It was a totally normal thing for him. On the other side, they would give great gifts like good wine, dinners, sometimes small trips, stuff like that. Very nice people, and I sometimes miss working for them and seeing them, but they both basically semi-retired during the pandemic. It does sound like they were nice people. It sounds like they'd be amenable to listening to people talk about their problems. I mean, it sounded like they were kind of paid at least a good wage if people were willing to stick around, or at least that they liked these people. It didn't sound like they were completely out of touch if they were giving away stuff people actually liked, especially like the small trips, to be able to get a taste of what these guys just did on a whim.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 7. Isn't it funny we're the same age, but my dad bought me a condo and you have to work 2 jobs? Bro, how did you not flip your smeg at that? Yeah, language like that would have me catching a case. Isn't it funny that I have the willpower to not beat your butt while you have no will of your own? Yeah, so funny. Bless you for just thinking he's out of touch. In the wrong country, he'd be kidnapped for ransom. It's mind-boggling how people will flex that they had their smeg handed to them. Better than lying about being self-made, though, I guess. Thank you. Yes, I like to say I earned my money the old-fashioned way. I inherited it. Story 8. I was working at a car dealership and saw the owner pull up in a $250,000 Porsche GT3. Told him how much I loved the car and dreamt of owning one someday. Owner looked at me confused and said, "What do you mean? We sell them right here, you know." Totally blew my mind that he didn't realize his employees couldn't afford the cars they were selling. Owner is obviously a salesman at heart. $1,806 a month at 78.66%, and you can drive this baby off the lot. Only $18,000 down. Son, if you work hard, do your overtime, and don't mess up, I'll have a new one next year. Did you ask him about that 50% employee discount? Which would make it a mere $125K? What a putz. You're positive that he wasn't being sarcastic and smeggy about it? Story 9. Oh yeah, you can keep all of this since I'm moving out. I'll buy new stuff for my next place. Some dude I knew who was taking classes at a prestigious university in a very nice studio apartment, whose father had just flown in from Indonesia just to help him pack his clothes. I got a full mattress set that was about $3K, multiple leathers for carpeting, expensive-looking paintings, way too much IKEA stuff, and a Dyson vacuum. I used to live in St. Louis, Missouri, way back. I had this friend who marked Big Trash Pickup Day in specific neighborhoods for just this reason. The quality and amount of trash these loaded people throw out is amazing. Oh, dude, it's insane. They'll sell their stuff for dirt cheap on Facebook Marketplace, too, because they only used it once. My bread maker was originally $500, but I got it for $75 from some lady who got bored of it in like a day. Story 10. My boss is an attorney. A client who was filling out her financial statement for a divorce realized that she had forgotten to include her student loans on the report. Laughing somewhat ruefully, she said, "I can't believe I forgot to include that." And in a bright, sunny voice, my boss laughed and said, "I sometimes forget that I own a boat." The client and I quietly locked eyes with a shared understanding of how out of touch that was. I have a car that I bought for $100 that's been sitting in storage since 2019, and I frequently forget that I own it. I wonder if people think I'm rich when I joke about that. I have about $2,000 to my name. Yeah, we also have a boat we forget we own a fair bit, mainly because we can't afford to fix the motor and no one wanted to buy it, so it's in limbo at my father-in-law's place. Story 11. I was talking to my manager about a mistake on a check. Me. This isn't even enough to cover my daughter's daycare for the month. Her. Well, what did you do with the money you were just paid? Ma'am. Food, rent, electricity, and car payment. Boom. Check gone. What fracking right does she have to ask what you did with your paycheck? Oh, I was ticked. I had some issues with my management before that have been resolved. I work in a sales environment, so everyone there is just wildly out of touch. Another coworker mentioned something about a contract being $20 off, and she said, "It's just $20. I'm not going to miss it." That at least makes sense. Fixing a $20 mistake might end up costing almost $20 plus hassle. Story 12. One of my former coworkers grew up in a wealthy family and married into more wealth, but they decided she should work anyways. She was outside her car crying one day, waiting for her husband to pick her up, saying she couldn't drive her car because a light was on. My buddy looked. It was a low tire pressure light. He asked if she wanted help filling up the tire. Her sobbing response, "This is a Mercedes. You can't just put air in the tire." Edit. To everyone wondering why she would cry about a tire pressure light, I think that was the second time the light came on in 3 months, so she didn't think it was safe or reliable anymore and traded it in soon after. I believe the next one was a Lexus. She was also very much the type of person who would cry because she had to wait 30 minutes to get picked up while everyone else could go home. Story 13. One thing I've learned about very wealthy people is they tend to hang around with other very wealthy people. I mean, if I wanted to take a vacation to Aspen and go skiing, I'm going to pay out my butthole for that. Between flight, equipment rental, and hotel, a wealthy person will just talk to their friends who will offer up a multi-million-dollar chalet that they have just for funsies. Wealthy people will literally have a ski chalet that they rarely go to that houses all of their top-of-the-line ski equipment and just offer it to their friends. This comment reminds me of living in New York City when I was young. Everything is either incredibly expensive and impossible to get into, or completely free and easy. Simply depends on who you know. Story 14. My boss's wife grew up wealthy and then married an heir to the throne for a multi-million-dollar organization. She's meandering around our office bullpen one day and brings me into the conversation. How about you? Where would you take your lady on a honeymoon? Me. I don't know. Go to the coast for a week and just enjoy the sun? She laughed out loud at me and said, "Oh my God, no woman will ever marry you unless you're going to take her on a Hawaiian honeymoon." At the time, I made $10 an hour. Who the hell wants to marry a woman who demands a Hawaiian honeymoon? Going to the coast for the week sounds really ideal, to be honest. No stress, no deep planning, less budget concern. Ideal after a supposedly hectic wedding. Story 15. Long ago, when I was a server in a country club, I was very new to properly opening wine bottles as I was using my key to take off the foil and gash the webbing on my hand badly. Husband and wife at the table. I put down the bottle and was about to leave when he said, "Who told you to stop pouring?" I picked it up, poured the wine dribbling blood all over the white tablecloth, went outside, had a smoke, and thought about my life. For your job, obviously not, but it would have been nice to get the blood right in there with the wine. Definitely a cigarette moment. Story 16. They lived in Boston, and we were talking about how small condos are there. They were lamenting that they had no space, and as a result, they had to buy another condo. This was Beacon Hill, because they ran out of space to store their Persian rugs. This reminds me of that scene in 30 Rock where Liz is getting ready to pull the trigger on a really nice apartment, and some guy sweeps in and is like, "I'll take it. My son can store his motorcycles here." Edit. Fine, it was Floyd. Y'all pedantic. That wouldn't have happened if she had moved to Cleveland. Story 17. I was between jobs, and a bunch of my friends told me that I should take the time to travel the world. Like, A, just because someone doesn't have a job doesn't mean they can just up and travel the world. In fact, the opposite is more likely. But also, B, you motherfrackers thought the reason I wasn't traveling the world was because I hadn't thought of it? This happened to me as well. Friend in finance told me to go on a sabbatical, and I was like, who's gonna pay my rent? How would I afford a vacay? And it costs money for someone to watch my dog. Story 18. I have no hair on my body. You should have your husband take you to get laser hair removal. It only cost me $10,000. Maybe in my dreams. She was the mayor's daughter, and I was catering her dog's birthday party. The best laugh all day. The dog's birthday party? Even funnier if they were catering the food for the dogs. Story 19. Built a $3 million+ house for a couple. After the neighbors built their home, we're talking, and the wife says, "That little house is so dinky. We have a joke going that we call it the help house." Now, this is still a $700K $1 million home, no less. Just struck me as not very grounded. They sound like jerks. Story 20. I was venting to a schoolmate about not being able to have a car. She said, "Why don't you just ask your mom?" It literally broke my brain. Like, yeah, why didn't I think of that? I know the feeling. I was probably the only person in my high school who bought my own car. Didn't even get it until senior year.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.